close your eyes, take a slow breath in, and let it out. You are comfortable. You are safe. And tonight, we are going on a very long, very gentle journey together, back to the very beginning of one of the greatest stories ever told in the history of games, television, and childhood wonder. A story that started not in a boardroom, not with a massive budget, but with one quiet, curious boy chasing insects through the rice paddies and wooded hillsides of a small Japanese town. A boy who looked at the world and saw connections that no one else had noticed yet. This is the story of Pokemon. 165 facts told slowly as bedtime stories. There is no rush. Let the words drift over you like clouds. Let each fact settle into your mind like a leaf falling onto still water. We begin at the very beginning. Section 1. Origins and Beginnings, the world that bugs built. Fact number 1. Pokemon was invented by a man named Satoshi Tajiri, and his childhood nickname, fittingly, was Dr. Bug. Imagine a small town in western Tokyo in the 1960s and 1970s, a place called Machida. Back then, before the city reached out its long fingers and smoothed everything into concrete and shopping centers, Machida had rice paddies. It had streams. It had the kind of wooded edges that exist between neighborhoods and wilderness, those liminal, magical places where children disappear for entire afternoons. And young Satoshi Tajiri disappeared into those places constantly. He was not particularly interested in school, not particularly interested in sitting still. He was interested in bugs. Specifically, he was obsessed with collecting them. Beetles, dragonflies, butterflies, caterpillars, all manner of crawling and flying things. He would set out in the mornings with a jar and return home in the evenings with something extraordinary, something alive, something that required a name and a place to sleep. His parents and teachers worried about him. His grades were mediocre. He seemed distracted. But Satoshi Tajiri was not distracted. He was paying very close attention. He was just paying attention to the wrong things from their perspective. From his own perspective, he was learning the single most important lesson of his life, that the world is full of hidden creatures, and that finding them, naming them, and forming a relationship with them is one of the deepest satisfactions a human being can feel. Fact number 2. By the time Tajiri was a teenager, the rice paddies and streams of his childhood Machida had been paved over, drained, or fenced off. The insects were gone. The magic spaces were gone. That sense of loss never left him. And decades later, it would become the emotional engine of Pokemon. He wanted to give children what he had lost. A world full of creatures to find. Fact number 3. Before Pokemon, Satoshi Tajiri created a video game magazine. In the early 1980s, when he was a teenager, Tajiri became obsessed with a new kind of electronic insect, arcade games. He spent so much time and so many coins in arcades that his father threatened to cut off his allowance entirely. But instead of simply playing games, Tajiri started writing about them. He and a friend, Ken Sugimori, who would later become Pokemon's original artist, hand-assembled a gaming fanzine called Game Freak. They photocopied it themselves. They sold it at comic markets. It was passionate, obsessive, and deeply personal, the way only things made by teenagers who truly love something can be. Game Freak, that little photocopied magazine, eventually became Game Freak, the game development studio. The same name, the same people, the same obsession. Fact number 4. The original concept for Pokemon was called Capsule Monsters, and it was inspired in large part by the Nintendo Game Boy's link cable. When the Game Boy launched in 1989, Tajiri had an experience that he described later as almost visionary. He looked at the link cable, that small, unremarkable cord that connected two Game Boys together. And he saw something else entirely. He saw two insects, connected by a thread, passing something between them. He thought, what if two children could connect their games like this? What if they could trade living creatures through that wire? What if the whole point was not just to catch things, but to share them, to complete something together that no single person could complete alone? That image, two children, two Game Boys, one thin cable, creatures passing between them, was the seed of everything. Fact number 5. It took 6 years to turn that seed into a game. From 1990 to 1996, Tajiri and his small team at Game Freak worked on what would eventually become Pocket Monsters Red and Green. Those were genuinely hard years. The studio nearly went bankrupt more than once. Team members worked without salaries during the leanest periods. Tajiri himself reportedly took no salary at all during some stretches, surviving on money from his father. Nintendo, which had agreed to publish the game, was patient in the way that only a company with nothing particular riding on a small, odd project can be patient. Nobody at Nintendo seems to have expected very much from Capsule Monsters, which had been renamed and re-renamed several times. The game that almost wasn't became the game that changed everything. Fact number 6. Ken Sugimori drew the original 151 Pokemon by hand, with ink and watercolors. There was no digital art pipeline. There were no tablets or styluses. Sugimori sat at a desk with paper, brushes, and bottles of paint and created the creatures that would eventually appear on everything from lunchboxes to postage stamps to the sides of airplanes. His style was deliberately soft, with rounded shapes and gentle shading. He wanted the creatures to feel approachable, not threatening, the way the insects of Tajiri's childhood were approachable to a child who knew and loved them. Many of the earliest Pokemon designs went through numerous iterations. Raiden, the large rock and ground rhino Pokemon, is widely believed to have been the very first Pokemon ever designed, long before Pikachu, long before Charizard, long before any of the creatures that would become iconic. Raiden was a test subject for how Pokemon could move in 3 dimensions during the game's earliest prototype phase. Fact number 7. Pikachu was not always the franchise mascot. In the original Pocket Monsters Red and Green, Pikachu was just one of 151 creatures. It was not especially prominent. It was not featured on the box art. The original box arts for Red and Green showed a completely different creature. A silhouette of Gengar on one cover and Nidorino on the other, both in a dramatic pose suggesting battle. Pikachu was simply one choice among many. It was the animated television series, which began development alongside the games, that elevated Pikachu to its current divine status. The producers of the anime wanted a mascot character, something cute, recognizable, small enough to sit on a shoulder, expressive enough to carry emotional scenes without dialogue. Pikachu, with its round cheeks and enormous eyes, was chosen. And when the anime aired, the rest was history. Fact number 8. The designer who created Pikachu was not Ken Sugimori, but a woman named Atsuko Nishida. Nishida was a character designer at Game Freak, and her original concept for Pikachu was apparently somewhat different from what eventually appeared in the games. According to interviews, the design went through revisions, but the essential Pikachu-ness of the thing, the round body, the expressive face, the lightning bolt tail, those were Nishida's ideas. She also designed Sylveon decades later, suggesting a remarkable consistency of gentle, expressive design sensibility across her entire career at the studio. Fact number 9. The names Red and Green for the original games were not chosen arbitrarily. In Japan, the game launched as Pocket Monsters Red and Pocket Monsters Green, a deliberate color pairing chosen to suggest two halves of something complete, like two complementary colors on a spectrum. When the games came to North America and Europe, green was replaced by blue. a version that had already been released in Japan as a special third version, with improved graphics and dialogue. So, Western players received red and blue, while Japanese players had originally received red and green. This is why, to this day, the complementary versions of the original games feel slightly different depending on whether you grew up in Japan or the rest of the world. Fact number 10. In Japan, Pokémon launched on February 27, 1996. In North America, it didn't arrive until September 28, 1998, over 2.5 years later. Those 2.5 years were significant. By the time Pokémon reached North America, the anime was already in production, the trading card game had been localized, and Nintendo had arranged what might be one of the most carefully orchestrated media launches in the history of children's entertainment. The games, the show, and the cards all hit at roughly the same time, each one feeding the others, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of excitement that spread through elementary schools and playgrounds with the speed and enthusiasm of something genuinely unprecedented. Children who lived through 1998 and 1999 in North America sometimes describe it as a kind of collective dream. A moment when everyone was suddenly speaking the same language, chasing the same creatures, arguing about the same questions. Which starter did you choose? Have you caught Mewtwo yet? Do you have a holographic Charizard? Fact number 11. The decision to release 2 versions of each game simultaneously, red and blue, gold and silver, and so on, was directly inspired by Tajiri's childhood insect collecting. Different insects appeared in different locations. Some could only be found in one particular meadow, one particular season, one particular time of day. The joy of collecting was not just finding things, it was trading with friends who had found different things. Tajiri wanted to replicate that social dimension of collecting in the games. By making certain Pokémon version exclusive, he guaranteed that no single player could complete the Pokédex alone. You had to connect. You had to trade. You needed a friend, or at least a playground acquaintance willing to exchange their Vulpix for your Growlithe. That mechanic, so simple on its face, turned Pokémon into a social experience unlike anything else in gaming. Fact number 12. The number 151 was not accidental or arbitrary. According to Tajiri's own interviews, the number of original Pokémon went through several iterations. At various points, there were plans for more, and at various points the team considered cutting down. The final number of 151, with Mew as the hidden secret 151st, was chosen partly for practical reasons related to the Game Boy cartridge's memory limitations, and partly because it felt complete. A Pokédex of 151 was achievable. It was just large enough to feel like an epic quest, and just small enough to feel like a quest that could actually end. The 151st Pokémon, Mew, was added to the game's data very late in development by a programmer named Shigeki Morimoto, who secretly inserted the data without telling the rest of the team. He managed to fit Mew into the game's code in a way that did not break anything else, a small miracle of programming, and Mew became one of the most famous secrets in gaming history. Fact number 13. Mew's early distributions were done entirely by hand. Before the internet, before Nintendo Wi-Fi, before Mystery Gift, if you wanted a Mew in your Game Boy game, you had to attend a special Nintendo event in person. Nintendo employees would walk around with a Game Boy of their own, connected by link cable to your Game Boy, and transfer Mew directly into your game. Children would line up for hours. Some drove across cities or states with their parents. Getting a Mew was not just getting a digital creature. It was an event, a story, something you could tell your friends about. It was proof that you had been somewhere and done something. That tactile social quality, the sense that Pokémon existed not just in your cartridge, but in the real world between real people, was baked into the franchise from the very beginning. And there it is. The very first chapter of our long, slow journey together. We have barely begun, There are 152 more facts waiting for you, each one a small, warm light in the dark. Before we drift into the next chapter, I want to ask you something, gently, quietly, the way you might ask a friend before they fall asleep. If you are enjoying this journey, if these stories are settling you into a softer, quieter space, please consider subscribing. It takes just a moment, and it means the world. And if you have a favorite Pokemon, one that you have always loved, one that has been with you since childhood, leave its name in the comments. I would love to know. I read everyone. Now, let us continue. The lights are low, the evening is still, and we are heading to the world of Kanto and all of its hidden secrets. Section 2. Kanto's Hidden Secrets. Glitches, Legends, and Lavender Town. Fact number 14. The original Pokemon Red and Blue games were akari, by any technical measurement, quite buggy. This is not a criticism. It is almost an endearment. The Game Boy was a limited machine, and the ambition of what Tajiri and his team were trying to build pressed against those limitations constantly. The result was a game with more cracks in its walls than perhaps any other Nintendo product of its era. And from those cracks emerged legends, myths, glitches that became as famous as the game itself, passed between children like ghost stories at sleepovers, whispered across lunch tables, documented in handwritten notes stuffed into binders alongside homework. Fact number 15. Missing No is not a Pokemon. It is an accident. And it is one of the most famous accidents in gaming history. Missing No, short for missing number, is a glitch entity that appears in Pokemon Red and Blue when players perform a specific sequence of actions involving the Cinnabar Island coastline and the Old Man in Viridian City. If you talk to the Old Man, watch his Pokemon catching demonstration, then immediately fly to the east coast of Cinnabar Island and surf along the shoreline, you will encounter wild Pokemon from a data structure that was never meant to be accessed directly. Among those encounters is Missing No, a creature represented by visual noise, a scrambled pixel form, a ghost in the machine. Missing No famously duplicates items. If you have a particular item in the 6th slot of your bag when you encounter and run from Missing No, that item will have its quantity increased by 128. Children used this to get 128 rare candies or 128 Master Balls. Teachers tried to confiscate their Game Boys. Parents were bewildered. Missing No was everywhere. Fact number 16. Despite its glitchy appearance, Missing No does not corrupt your save file, at least not reliably. This was the subject of immense debate in schoolyards and early internet forums. Some children swore that Missing No had destroyed their game. Others had encountered it dozens of times with no ill effects. The truth, as best as anyone has determined through years of careful investigation, is that Missing No itself is relatively harmless. But some of the other glitch entities you can encounter through the same method are not. The related entity known as Pokemon M, sometimes written as M with a space and some punctuation marks, does tend to cause more serious data issues. But Missing No, the famous one, the one everyone talked about, usually fine. Which perhaps explains why it became beloved rather than feared. Fact number 17. There is a Pokemon in the original games that is widely believed to be impossible to catch without cheating. And that Pokemon is a level 100 Magikarp. Actually, that is not entirely true, but the legend exists. Here is the real version, which is stranger. Through specific glitch manipulation in the original games, it is possible to encounter wild Pokemon at levels far above the normal maximum for those locations. The mechanics of the game's wild Pokemon level generation, when manipulated just right, can produce creatures at extremely high levels. Whether you can then catch those creatures depends on a series of probability calculations that the game was not designed to support at those levels. Players have spent years mapping the exact boundaries of what is and isn't possible. The game contains multitudes that were never intended. Fact number 18. Lavender Town has a ghost story attached to it that is one of the most persistent urban legends in gaming history. The so-called Lavender Town Syndrome. The legend claims that the original Lavender Town music in the Japanese version of Pokémon Red and Green, released in February 1996, contained binaural frequencies that caused children to experience headaches, nausea, and in some versions of the story, far worse. The story claims that the music was altered before international release to remove these frequencies, which is why the Western version of the Lavender Town theme sounds slightly different from the Japanese original. This is not true. There is no evidence that any children were harmed by video game music. The story is, in the technical sense, a creepypasta, an internet-age ghost story. But it spread so widely and took such firm root that many people who grew up in the 2000s and 2010s encountered it as established fact. Fact number 19. What is true is that the Lavender Town music was, in fact, slightly revised between the Japanese and the international releases, but for entirely mundane reasons related to the limitations of different hardware versions of the Game Boy's sound chip. The Japanese Game Boy and the Western Game Boy had slightly different audio circuitry. The music that sounded correct on one could sound subtly off on the other, so the composers adjusted it. That is the whole quiet truth behind the legend. A hardware compatibility adjustment transformed, through the magic of childhood imagination and internet mythology, into a tale of psychological horror. Fact number 20. The Pokémon Tower in Lavender Town, where much of the game's ghost imagery is concentrated, was designed to be genuinely unsettling, at least by the standards of a children's game. The Pokémon Tower is a graveyard, a multi-story structure filled with the gravestones of deceased Pokémon, your rivals Raticate, which you last saw healthy and battling you on the SS. Annie is widely believed to have died between that encounter and your rival's grief-stricken behavior in the Pokémon Tower. This is not stated explicitly anywhere in the game, but the pieces are there and they fit together in a way that has made players feel genuine sorrow for 25 years. The rival in Red and Blue, later given the canonical name Blue in various supplementary materials, is the game's antagonist, its foil, its challenge. But in Lavender Town, surrounded by gravestones, he is just a boy who lost something he loved. It is a brief, quiet moment of unexpected depth in a game aimed at children. Fact number 21. The Pokémon Ghastly, Haunter, and Gengar, the ghost-type family native to Lavender Town, were among the earliest Pokémon designs, conceptualized before many of the more elaborate creatures in the game. Gengar, in particular, has a design that has fascinated fans for decades. Its round, grinning purple form is sometimes interpreted as a shadow version of Clefable, a theory that gains some support from their nearly identical silhouettes. The two Pokémon have the same rounded shape, the same ear-like protrusions, the same small limbs. Whether this was intentional, a dark mirror of the sweet, pink, normal type, has never been confirmed by Game Freak. But the visual echo is striking enough that it continues to generate discussion. Fact number 22. The Safari Zone in Pokémon Red and Blue was designed around an entirely different catching mechanic, and that mechanic was, for many children, a source of tremendous frustration. In the Safari Zone, players cannot use their own Pokémon to battle wild Pokémon into submission. Instead, they are given a set of Safari Balls and a bag of bait and rocks, and they must try to catch creatures through a combination of luck and light strategy. Throwing bait makes a Pokémon more likely to eat and less likely to flee, but also harder to catch. Throwing rocks makes a Pokemon more likely to flee but easier to catch. Everything is governed by probability rolls that the player cannot see. The three most desired Pokemon in the Safari Zone, Scyther, Pinsir, and Tauros, all have high flee rates. Catching Tauros was particularly difficult, and catching one at a good level for competitive play was so improbable that it became a kind of rite of passage. Many players spent entire afternoons in the Safari Zone and caught nothing useful. It was, in a way, designed to feel like actually hunting wild animals. Unpredictable, humbling, sometimes magical. Fact number 23. There is a location in Pokemon Red and Blue called Cerulean Cave, and it contains Mewtwo. But what makes Cerulean Cave remarkable is not what is in it, but how it feels. Cerulean Cave is only accessible after you have defeated the Elite Four and become champion. The cave itself is dark, labyrinthine, and filled with incredibly powerful wild Pokemon, much stronger than anything you encountered on your journey to the championship. Music plays that is distinct from any other track in the game. Slower, heavier, with a sense of something watching. Mewtwo waits at the end of it all, level 70, the most powerful creature in the game, with a move pool designed to demolish anything unprepared. The discovery of Cerulean Cave and the journey through it to find Mewtwo was, for many children, the most memorable experience in their entire Pokemon journey. More memorable, perhaps, than the Elite Four itself, because Cerulean Cave felt secret. It felt earned. It felt like something the game was not sure it wanted to tell you. Fact number 24. The move Splash does absolutely nothing. It has always done nothing. Its in-game description simply states that nothing happened. Splash is learned naturally by Magikarp, the famously useless fish Pokemon who can only flop around uselessly until it evolves into the magnificent Gyarados at level 20. The joke of Splash, a move that literally accomplishes nothing, is part of Magikarp's larger character. The weakest thing imaginable, requiring enormous patience and faith, transforming into something magnificent. Magikarp is perhaps the single best metaphor in the game for a certain kind of hope. All of that effort, all of that patient, useless splashing, and then suddenly a dragon. Fact number 25. Pokemon Yellow, the third version released for the original generation, was specifically designed to reflect the anime rather than the games. In Yellow, your starter Pokemon is Pikachu, given to you by Professor Oak at the beginning of the game. This Pikachu cannot be stored in the PC. It follows you on your journey, visible behind your character on the overworld, the very first Pokemon in the series to do so. You can press a button at any time to turn around and check on your Pikachu's mood, and Pikachu will show you how it feels. Happy, irritated, puzzled, shy, through a series of small animated expressions. The rivals in Yellow use starter Pokemon teams that mirror those of Brock, Misty, and the other gym leaders from the anime. Jesse and James, Team Rocket's most famous operatives, appear as recurring opponents throughout the game, echoing their role in the show. Yellow is essentially a love letter to the children who had fallen in love with the anime and wanted to live inside it. Fact number 26. In the original games, the gym leaders had actual lives suggested by their dialogue and item drops. Misty, the Cerulean City gym leader, drops a TM for Water Pulse and delivers dialogue about her dream of traveling the world's oceans. Brock drops TM39, Rock Tomb, and talks with the weight of someone who has given up something he wanted. Later in the game, in Pallet Town, a small piece of lore, easily missed, suggests that Brock chose to stay and run the gym rather than pursue his own dreams because his family needed him. These are tiny, easily overlooked moments. The script of the original Pokemon games is not long, but within that brevity there is a surprising amount of humanity. Section 3. The Johto Hidden World. Gold, Silver, and the Space World. Demo fact number 27. Pokemon Gold and Silver are widely regarded as the high point of the classic Pokemon games, not just for what they added, but for the sense of completion they created. Gold and Silver were released in Japan in November 1999 and in North America in October 2000. They introduced 100 new Pokemon, bringing the total to 251. They introduced two new types, Steel and Dark, specifically to balance the competitive landscape that had been heavily dominated by Psychic-type Pokemon in the first generation. They introduced breeding, the time mechanic, two whole new regions to explore, and at the very end of the main story, a moment that felt then and still feels now like one of the most generous gifts a video game has ever given its players. We will get to that moment shortly. Fact number 28. Gold and Silver were designed to push the Game Boy Color hardware to its absolute limit, and at several points during development, it appeared they would be impossible to complete. The primary engineer working on the programming, Iwata Satoru, who would later become the president of Nintendo, was brought in during the final stretch when it became clear that the game's data was simply too large to fit on a cartridge. Iwata, who had a gift for programming efficiency that bordered on miraculous, rewrote significant portions of the game's code and compressed the data in ways that freed up enough space to complete the project. When Iwata reported back that he had found the space to finish the game, Tajiri reportedly broke down in tears. Fact number 29. Satoru Iwata, the man who saved Pokemon Gold and Silver through sheer programming brilliance, passed away in July 2015 at the age of 55. He had led Nintendo through two of its most significant periods: the runaway success of the Nintendo DS and Wii, and the difficult early years of the Wii U. He was beloved by Nintendo fans for his warmth, his accessibility, and his willingness to appear in Nintendo Direct presentations with self-deprecating humor and a gentle, genuine quality that felt nothing like a corporate spokesperson, and everything like someone who truly, deeply loved games. When he died, tributes poured in from across the gaming world. Many of them mentioned the same things: his kindness, his genius, and the ways those two qualities had always seemed to go together in him. Fact number 30. The famous Space World 1997 demo of Pokemon Gold and Silver showed a game that was substantially different from the version that was released 2 years later. In 1997, Nintendo held an event called Space World, at which an early demo of Gold and Silver was playable. This demo contained Pokemon that were never included in the final game. An early version of what would have been 50 or more additional creatures, many of which had designs that were subsequently shelved or repurposed. The demo was thought lost for years, existing only in fragments of photographs taken at the event. Then, in 2018, the ROM data for the Space World 1997 demo was leaked online. Fact number 31. The Space World demo contained, among other things, early versions of Pokemon that were later redesigned significantly, as well as entirely new species that were cut from the final game entirely. Some of the cut designs were heartbreaking in their charm. Small, simple creatures with clear inspirations that simply didn't make it through. There were early versions of Marill, Donphan, and Snubbull that differed notably from their final forms. There was an early version of Togepi that looked slightly different around the shell pattern. Most fascinatingly, the Space World demo contained what appeared to be early scrapped evolutions and pre-evolutions for several Generation 1 Pokemon, including an early form of Meowth that suggested a different evolutionary family entirely, and versions of various species that were subsequently redesigned for reasons we can only guess at. Fact number 32. The shiny Pokemon mechanic, in which a Pokemon appears in an alternate color palette and is accompanied by a sparkling animation, was introduced in Gold and Silver and was initially an accident of the trading system. When the games were developed to allow trading with the previous generation's games, the development team needed a way to encode and transmit the unique attributes of individual Pokemon. One of those attributes was a set of numbers called individual values, which determined each Pokemon's particular strengths. The shiny color palette was determined by a specific combination of these values, meaning that shiny Pokemon were not hand-placed rarities, but statistical outliers, creatures that had randomly generated a combination of values so specific that it produced a different color. The odds of encountering a shiny Pokemon in the wild in Gold and Silver were 1 in 8,192. A child playing normally for hundreds of hours might never see one. And yet when you did see one, that sparkling animation, that different color, that small thrill of impossible luck, it felt like a visitation, like the game itself had chosen to show you something rare. Fact number 33. The first shiny Pokemon that any player would encounter in Gold and Silver was not a wild encounter, but a scripted event. The Red Gyarados at the Lake of Rage. The Lake of Rage storyline involves Team Rocket forcing Pokemon to evolve by broadcasting a signal from the nearby Mahogany Town radio tower. As evidence of this forced evolution, a red Gyarados, a shiny Gyarados with its vivid red scales where there should be blue, appears at the center of the lake, thrashing in pain and confusion. It was, for many children, their very first shiny Pokemon. The moment of seeing it was unforgettable. The screen flash, the red scales, the realization that something different was happening. Game Freak knew that this guaranteed first encounter with the mechanic would make shinies feel magical rather than merely statistical. And they were correct. Fact number 34. Pokemon Crystal, released in 2001, was the first game in the series to allow the player to choose a female protagonist. The female player character, named Chris in supplementary materials, wore a distinctive blue and white outfit with a large hat and was rendered with the same level of care and detail as her male counterpart, gold. This seems unremarkable now when the series regularly features both male and female player characters with equal prominence. In 2001, in a franchise that had primarily featured male heroes in its marketing and media, it was a small but real acknowledgement that girls played Pokemon too, and not just as a secondary audience. Fact number 35. The legendary end of Pokemon Gold and Silver, the return to Kanto, is frequently cited as the greatest single moment in the series. After defeating the Elite Four and becoming the champion of Johto, you are told that something strange is happening at Mount Silver, the enormous peak between the two regions. You can travel there, and at the end of a long, cold, silent climb through a cave filled with the strongest wild Pokemon in the game, you find a figure standing alone at the summit. No music plays. The cave is silent. The figure turns. It is Red, the player character from the original game, now older, now silent, now the strongest trainer in the world. He says nothing. He only says, and then the battle begins. Red's team was, at the time of Gold and Silver's release, the single hardest trainer battle in any Pokemon game. His Pikachu was level 81. His team was drawn from the most powerful Pokemon of Generation 1. Fighting him required preparation, strategy, and a roster of your best Pokemon at their peak. But more than the battle's difficulty, what children remembered was the silence. The mountain. The snow. The way the game had given their old journey a mirror, a ghost, a final challenge that felt mythic. You had become someone who could face the hero of the original story. The loop had closed. Fact number 36. The Pokemon Unknown, the alphabet-shaped psychic-type creatures found in the ruins of Alph in Gold and Silver, are connected to a puzzle system that, when fully solved, unlocks messages spelled out on the walls of the ruins. The ruins of Alf contain sliding puzzles that, when completed, cause unknown to pour out of hidden panels in the walls. Completing all the puzzles and solving the word puzzles scattered through the ruins eventually reveals messages. Fragmented, ancient feeling, evoking a lost civilization that used the unknown script to communicate. The messages reference Arceus and Ho-Oh in ways that weren't fully understood until much later games filled in the mythology. The ruins of Alfar, in microcosm, everything that Gold and Silver did best. Quiet, mysterious, rewarding the patient player with layers of meaning. Section 4. The anime's secret history. Banned episodes, 4 kids, and the story of Ash and Pikachu. Fact number 37. The Pokemon anime premiered in Japan on April 1st, 1997, April Fool's Day, though this was coincidental rather than thematic. The anime was produced by OLM Inc., a studio founded specifically to animate the series, and it was directed by Kunihiko Yuyama, who would guide the series for over 2 decades. The first episode introduces Ash Ketchum, known in Japan as Satoshi, named after the franchise's creator, as a 10-year-old boy from Pallet Town who oversleeps on the morning he is supposed to receive his starter Pokemon, and arrives at Professor Oak's laboratory to find that all 3 starters have been taken by trainers who arrived on time. What he receives instead is a Pikachu who does not like him at all. Fact number 38. The first episode of the Pokemon anime contains a moment that has never been satisfactorily explained by any official source. Ho-Oh. In the very first episode, as Ash and his unwilling Pikachu walk through a rainstorm on their first day together, they witness a rainbow spread across the sky. And flying along that rainbow, briefly, unmistakably, is a large, colorful bird Pokemon. A Pokemon that would not be officially revealed to the public until Gold and Silver launched more than 2 years later. That Pokemon is Ho-Oh. Whether this was deliberate, a planted secret, a teaser hidden in plain sight, or simply an early design that the production team included without thinking about the implications, has never been confirmed. But the fact that the very first episode of the very first season contains what would eventually be revealed as one of the most powerful and mythologically significant Pokemon in the franchise is the kind of thing that makes the world feel designed rather than accidental. Fact number 39. The Pokemon anime was dubbed for English-speaking audiences by a company called 4Kids Entertainment, and 4Kids made changes to the anime that range from the understandable to the bewildering. 4Kids was a company that specialized in localizing anime for American children, and its philosophy was, broadly, to make content as inoffensive and culturally neutral as possible for a mainstream American audience. This led to some changes that are defensible. Translating cultural references, swapping Japanese text for English text, adjusting some of the more intense or scary moments. It also led to some changes that remain baffling. Fact number 40. The most famous 4Kids alteration is the replacement of onigiri, Japanese rice balls, with donuts. In multiple episodes of the early anime, characters eat or carry onigiri, triangular rice balls wrapped in seaweed, a completely ordinary Japanese snack food. 4Kids, apparently concerned that American children would not recognize or accept this food, digitally painted them into donuts, a process that produced visual anomalies in several shots, since onigiri and donuts are different shapes, and the painting was not always precise. The result was scenes in which characters were visibly holding triangular donuts. This has become one of the most cited examples in discussions of localization philosophy, a cautionary tale about the risks of overcorrecting for cultural difference in ways that create new, stranger problems. Fact number 41. The infamous episode Electric Soldier Porygon, which aired in Japan in December 1997, was pulled after it triggered photosensitive seizures in an estimated 685 children and prompted hundreds more to report symptoms including dizziness, nausea, and discomfort. The episode involved a sequence of rapidly flashing red and blue lights, a technique sometimes used in anime for dramatic effect, that was particularly intense by any standard. The incident prompted a 4-month hiatus of the Pokemon anime in Japan and led to new industry-wide guidelines about flashing imagery in animated content. The episode has never been rebroadcast in Japan or in any other country. It is one of the very few episodes of the Pokemon anime that has been permanently pulled from circulation, existing now only in recordings made by viewers who taped it on the original broadcast. Fact number 42. As a result of the Porygon incident, the Pokemon Porygon, Porygon 2, and Porygon Z have never appeared as central characters in any subsequent anime episode, despite being entirely blameless. The flashing lights in the episode were produced not by Porygon, but by Pikachu using Thunderbolt to destroy missiles in a virtual reality environment. The visual effect was a consequence of the battle animation, not of Porygon's own abilities. Nevertheless, Porygon appeared to have been informally blacklisted from starring roles out of an abundance of caution, perhaps a desire to avoid any association, however distant, with the incident. This is sometimes referred to with affection as the Porygon curse. 3 Pokemon who simply exist in the background of the franchise, never protagonists, never featured, walking quietly through the story without ever quite being allowed to tell their own part of it. Fact number 43. There are multiple Pokemon anime episodes that were pulled, delayed, or heavily edited for reasons other than the Porygon incident. An episode featuring Jynx was pulled after concerns were raised about the character's design, which some viewers found reminiscent of a racial caricature. Jynx's design was subsequently revised in later appearances, with her dark face color changed to purple. Several episodes were pulled in the aftermath of a school shooting in the United States, due to scenes involving characters pointing objects that resembled guns. An episode called Beauty and the Beach was long held back from American broadcast because it featured James of Team Rocket wearing an inflatable chest prosthetic and behaving in ways that the American distributors felt were inappropriate for young children. When it finally aired in a special context, significant content was edited. Fact number 44. Ash Ketchum competed in the Pokemon World Coronation Series, and finally, after 25 years of not being the champion of anything, won. For most of the anime's run, from 1997 to approximately 2023, Ash Ketchum had never won a major regional championship. He had placed in the top 16, the top 8, the top 4. He had lost improbably, he had lost heartbreakingly, he had lost in ways that generated genuine frustration among audiences who had followed him for a decade or more. The message, which the show seemed to intend seriously, was about the journey rather than the destination, about growth, friendship, and the experience of trying. But in the Pokemon World Coronation Series arc, Ash's team, culminating with his Pikachu, defeated trainer after trainer until he finally stood at the top. World Champion. Number 1. The reaction from longtime fans was a mixture of triumph and a strange kind of grief, the emotion of watching something end. Fact number 45. Shortly after Ash became world champion, the anime announced that it would retire Ash and Pikachu as the protagonists and introduce new main characters. This announcement, made in late 2022, was received with a great deal of feeling by the community. Ash had been the face of Pokemon animation for 25 years, longer than many of his fans had been alive. Pikachu had been his partner through every journey, every league, every late-night episode watched in pajamas on Saturday mornings. The new protagonists, Liko and Roy, began their adventures in April 2023 in a series that, while well-received, will always carry the awareness of what it replaced. Ash and Pikachu did not die, did not disappear, did not go somewhere sad. They simply walked away, over a hill, into the morning, heading toward the next adventure that we will never see. Section 5. The Trading Card Game, Cards, Holofoils, and Ancient Mew Fact number 46. The Pokemon trading card game was created not by Game Freak or Nintendo, but by a company called Media Factory, working under license. Media Factory developed the TCG in collaboration with Wizards of the Coast, the American company best known for Magic: The Gathering, for the international release. The game launched in Japan in October 1996, less than a year after the video games, and arrived in North America in January 1999, arriving as the video games had with impeccable timing at the height of Pokemon's cultural peak. Fact number 47. The base set of the Pokemon trading card game contained 102 cards, and within those 102 cards, there were 4 Pokemon that became iconic beyond anything their designers could have anticipated: Charizard, Blastoise, Venusaur, and the holographic Mewtwo. But of these, Charizard was supreme. The holographic Charizard, card number 4 of 102, a rare holo with 120 HP and the move Fire Spin, became the most wanted card in an era of unprecedented card wanting. Children traded entire collections for a single Charizard. Parents were badgered into purchasing packs at grocery stores and gas stations. Playground economies formed around the card's value, systems of exchange and negotiation that were children's first introduction to the concept of scarcity driving desire. Fact number 48. A PSA 10 graded first edition base set holographic Charizard sold at auction for $420,000 in 2022. That number bears slow repetition. $420,000? For a piece of printed cardboard measuring approximately 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches, featuring an illustration of a fictional fire-breathing dragon. The card was purchased by a collector. Its condition, a perfect 10 out of 10 from the Professional Sports Authenticator grading service, means the card has no scratches, no print defects, no edge wear, no surface imperfections, detectable under magnification. It is the same card that children bent and shuffled and traded in lunchrooms in 1999, held to its highest possible standard of preservation. Fact number 49. First edition cards from the base set can be distinguished from unlimited edition cards by a small oval stamp on the lower left portion of the card's art, reading Edition 1. This small stamp is worth thousands of dollars. In a sense, the entire modern Pokemon card collecting market rests on the significance of that tiny oval. The existence of first edition cards made Pokemon cards into something more than toys. It made them collectibles in the true sense, objects whose value was tied not just to their content, but to their provenance, their era, their position in a production history. Fact number 50. The illustrators of the original Pokemon trading cards have never received the level of recognition that, in hindsight, they perhaps deserve. Among the most beloved artists of the base set era were Mitsuhiro Arita, who illustrated many of the most iconic cards, including the holographic Charizard, and Ken Sugimori, whose clean, official game art appeared on numerous cards. But there were many other artists whose work shaped the aesthetic of the era. Warm, painterly, sometimes whimsical illustrations of Pokemon in natural environments, doing natural things, suggesting lives and habitats beyond the battlefield. The base set Bulbasaur, illustrated with soft watercolor-like warmth against a meadow background. The Clefairy dancing in moonlight. The Snorlax asleep across a path. These images trained a generation's visual sensibility in ways that are difficult to fully articulate. Fact number 51. The Ancient Mew card, distributed as a promotional item with the second Pokemon movie in 1999 and 2000, was deliberately designed to appear as an archaeological artifact. The card was printed with a text that was not English, not Japanese, but a constructed runic script designed to evoke the idea of something ancient and unknowable. The Pokemon Power and Attacks sections were written entirely in this constructed language so that the card was legally unreadable by anyone without a decoder. Nintendo eventually provided a decoder sheet to translate the text, which turned out to be straightforward game text in unusual script. But for the weeks between the card's distribution and the decoder's release, Ancient Mew existed as a genuine mystery object, a card you could hold but not fully understand. Fact number 52. The Pokemon TCG has, as of recent years, experienced a renaissance of collecting enthusiasm that rivals or exceeds the original 1999 frenzy. During the pandemic years, the combination of nostalgia, increased disposable income among adults who had grown up with the cards, and the social media amplification of card opening videos created a demand spike that emptied shelves in stores across multiple countries. Target and Walmart temporarily stopped selling Pokemon cards due to incidents in their stores related to the scarcity of certain products. Grown adults, engineers, teachers, doctors, parents were refreshing web pages at midnight hoping to secure allocation of new product releases. The exact same psychological mechanism that had made children trade entire lunchboxes for a single holographic Charizard was operating undimmed 25 years later. Section 6, Mythology and Folklore. The ancient stories behind the Pokemon fact number 53. Many Pokemon are not invented from nothing, but are drawn from ancient myths, folklore, and natural history from cultures around the world, most commonly Japanese, Chinese, and broader East Asian traditions. Understanding these sources transforms the experience of looking at Pokemon. What seemed like a simple design decision, this Pokemon is red, this one lives near water, reveals itself as a deliberate reference to a centuries-old story. The game is, among many other things, a gateway to mythology. Fact number 54. Gyarados, the ferocious water and flying type dragon that evolves from the humble Magikarp, is drawn directly from a Chinese legend about a carp climbing the Dragon Gate. The legend holds that the Yellow River contains a waterfall at a place called Longmen, the Dragon Gate. Every year, carp attempt to swim upstream and leap the falls. The vast majority fail. But a carp that succeeds in clearing the falls is transformed into a dragon. The story has been used for centuries in Chinese culture as a metaphor for perseverance and transformation. The idea that sufficiently determined effort can change the nature of a thing entirely. Magikarp, flopping uselessly for 19 levels, is the carp failing to clear the falls. Gyarados, ascending to level 20 in a burst of transformative fury, is the carp becoming the dragon. Fact number 55. Ninetales, the elegant fox Pokemon, is derived from the Kitsune, the fox spirit of Japanese mythology. Kitsune are shapeshifters, tricksters, and sometimes malevolent beings who accumulate power over centuries. An aged Kitsune grows additional tails. A nine-tailed Kitsune is the most powerful, the most ancient, the most dangerous. Ninetales, Obawateo, with its 9 elegant golden tails, embodies this mythology directly. Its Pokédex entry in several games suggests that each of its tails holds a different curse, and that touching a tail without permission brings 1,000 years of misfortune. The Kitsune appears in numerous games, films, and stories across East Asian culture. In Pokemon, it appears as the thing it most often appears as in Japanese folklore. Beautiful, dangerous, and ancient in a way that makes everything around it seem temporary. Fact number 56. Drowsy and Hypno, the psychic-type Pokemon introduced in Generation 1, are drawn from a creature in Japanese mythology called the Baku. The Baku is a dream-eating monster, a chimeric being that traditionally has features borrowed from multiple animals, including an elephant's trunk, a tiger's feet, and an ox's tail. According to legend, calling on the Baku before sleep will cause it to devour your nightmares. Some traditions held that you should not call on the Baku too eagerly, however, because a hungry Baku might eat not just your nightmares, but your dreams, your hopes, and your ambitions as well, leaving you empty. Drowsy's Pokédex entry states that it eats dreams through the nose and prefers the sweet dreams of children. Hypno, its evolution, carries a pendulum that it uses to hypnotize victims before eating their dreams. The Baku mythology is not merely an aesthetic influence here. It is the literal description of these Pokemon's behavior. Fact number 57. Arcanine, the legendary seeming fire dog Pokemon, is inspired by the Shisa, protective lion dog statues found throughout Okinawa and Ryukyu culture. Shisa are displayed in pairs at the entrances to homes and public buildings, believed to ward off evil and bring good fortune. They have the combined features of a lion and a dog, with an open-mouthed form to keep in good luck, and a closed-mouthed form to keep out evil. Arcanine's regal bearing, its fierce loyalty, and its association with ancient legends all echo the Shisa's role as a divine guardian. This is perhaps why Arcanine is classified in its Pokédex entries as the legendary Pokémon, not because it is rare or powerful in the game mechanical sense, but because its folkloric prototype occupied a legendary mythological space. Fact number 58. Lugia, the Silver Guardian Pokemon and mascot of Pokemon Silver, was not designed by Ken Sugimori but by the anime's director, Kunihiko Yuyama. This is unusual. Most main series Pokemon are designed by the Game Freak team, but Lugia was created specifically for the second Pokemon movie, Pokemon 2000, and its design came from Yuyama as a visual concept that was then incorporated into the games. Lugia's appearance, silver-white with a long neck and distinctive ridged back, was meant to evoke a creature of the deep ocean rather than the sky, which makes its classification as a psychic/flying type somewhat paradoxical. Yuyama has described the design process for Lugia as wanting something that felt ancient and solitary, a creature that had been at the bottom of the ocean for so long that it had forgotten what it was like to surface. Fact number 59. The three legendary birds of Kanto, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, have names that combine number roots from Spanish with thematic elements. Articuno contains uno, 1. Zapdos contains dos, 2. Moltres contains tres, 3. This naming convention was not unique to the English versions. The Japanese names follow a similar numerical pattern. The simple elegance of the system gives the three birds a set of collective identity that makes them feel like a family, a trio, a designed mythological group, rather than three coincidentally similar creatures. The same numerical naming convention would be used again with the Johto legendary dogs, Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, and with the Hun weather trio, though in less obvious forms. The Kanto birds are the most transparent example. Three creatures named essentially 1, 2, and 3. Fact number 60. Slowpoke, the slow-witted water/psychic Pokemon, has a unique evolutionary trigger that has no equivalent anywhere else in the series. Slowpoke evolves into Slowbro not through leveling up or using an evolutionary stone, but when a creature called Shellder clamps onto its tail. In the Pokemon world's internal logic, Slowbro exists as the Slowpoke who happened to have the right encounter. The Shellder on Slowbro's tail is not decorative. It is functionally part of the bouillon, releasing chemicals that boost Slowpoke's psychic abilities, even as it presumably feeds on the tail. There is something deeply strange about this relationship, something that sits between symbiosis and parasitism, between evolution and accident. Slowbro is, in a way, two creatures, or rather, one creature that has been permanently altered by another. If the shelter is ever removed, Slowbro reverts to Slowpoke. It is the only Pokemon in the series with a reversible evolution, and that reversal is defined by the loss of something that chose to hold on. Section 7. The Dark Pokédex. Entries that should not exist. Fact number 61. The Pokédex, the small device carried by trainers to record information about Pokemon, provides entries that, when read carefully, describe a world considerably darker than the sunny adventure the games might otherwise suggest. These entries have always been there. They are not hidden or difficult to find. But they are easy to gloss over when you are 12 years old and focused on leveling up, and they become considerably more affecting when you return to them as an adult with the patience to read. Fact number 62. Yamask carries a mask that, according to its Pokédex entry, is the face it had when it was human. Yamask, introduced in Generation 5, is classified as the spirit Pokémon. Its entry states that each Yamask carries a mask that was once its face as a human being. Yamask sometimes looks at the mask and cries. If a person is possessed by a Yamask, they gradually lose their memories until they, too, forget who they used to be. This is an entry in a children's video game. It sits there quietly, behind a menu, waiting for someone to tap it. The idea it conveys, a soul that remembers being human but cannot return, that carries its former face as a memento mori, that weeps for what it was, is as genuinely haunting as anything in adult horror fiction. Fact number 63. Drifloon, the balloon-like ghost Pokemon introduced in Generation 4, lures children. Its Pokédex entry states that Drifloon forms from the lingering spirits of people and Pokemon, and that it tries to carry off children and other small things by grabbing their hands. The entry notes that if you grab Drifloon's hand, it will try to pull you upward, but if the child is too heavy, the balloon might be pulled downward instead and pop. There is a moment in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl where the player encounters a young child who is very excited about the large red balloon they found. The implication, if you have read the Pokédex entry, is something the game leaves you to sit with. Fact number 64. Phantump, a small ghost Pokemon that looks like a small stump with a ghost emerging from it, is the spirit of a child. Its entry states that Phantump is created when a spirit possesses a tree stump, and that the spirit is that of a child who died while lost in the forest. Trevenant, Phantump's evolution, controls the trees in its forest to trap those who would harm the forest. The implication is that the child's spirit found in death a home in the forest it died in, and that it now protects what it once feared. There is something in this that approaches the structure of a fairy tale. The lost child who becomes the guardian of the place of loss. It does not make the death less tragic, but it gives it a shape. Fact number 65. Hypno's Pokédex entries, across multiple generations, describe behavior that can charitably be called concerning. Its entry in Pokemon Gold states that it carries a pendulum that creates a hypnotic aura, and that anyone who sees the pendulum swinging cannot take their eyes off it. The entry in Pokemon Fire Red adds that Hypno puts people to sleep by swinging its pendulum at them, and that there have been several incidents of it carrying off sleeping children. Several incidents. Carrying off sleeping children. This is paired with the Baku mythology noted earlier, the Dream Eater that, when too hungry, does not merely eat nightmares, but takes the whole person. The children's game contains, in its peripheral text, a tiny mythology of abduction. Fact number 66. Parasect, the mushroom-covered insect Pokemon, has had the same disturbing Pokédex details since the original games. The mushroom has taken over. Parasect begins its existence as Paras, a small crab-like creature with two small mushrooms on its back. As it evolves into Parasect, the mushrooms, which are based on the real-world cordyceps fungi, which infect and control insects, have grown to cover most of the creature's body. Its eyes are blank white. The mushroom, according to multiple Pokédex entries, has taken complete control of the host, and the Parasite is effectively no longer directing its own movements. Parasect is not a Pokemon. Parasect is a mushroom that uses a dead Paras as a vehicle. The game lets you catch it and train it and use it in battle, and the Pokédex just quietly notes that the thing doing the fighting is a fungal parasite and not the creature you might think. Fact number 67. Gengar's most compelling Pokédex detail is the suggestion that it is, somehow, the shadow version of Clefable. We touched on this earlier, but the thread deserves to be followed. Gengar and Clefable have nearly identical silhouettes. Clefable is pink, round, fairy-like, associated with the moon and with cheerfulness. Gengar is purple, shadow-like, associated with cold and with death. Multiple Pokédex entries refer to Gengar as something like a shadow that was separated from its original body. One entry in Pokemon Crystal states that on a moonlit night, Gengar may appear in a room and cause a cold shiver by mimicking the shadows of people. There's a theory, never confirmed by Game Freak, that Gengar is the ghost of a Clefable. Or rather, that when a Clefable dies, its shadow continues to live as a Gengar. The games do not say this, but they have arranged the silhouettes such that the idea is very hard to shake once it has occurred to you. Fact number 68. The most poignant Pokédex entry in the entire series may belong to Cubone. Cubone is the lonely Pokemon. Its entry states that it wears the skull of its dead mother on its head and cries for her every night. On the night of a full moon, the skull it wears glows with light, and the sound of Cubone's crying is said to carry the cries of its mother as well, as if the two voices cannot be separated. In the original games, this backstory takes on additional weight when you discover that Team Rocket has been killing Marowak, Cubone's evolved form, in order to obtain the skull bones that the organization sells. The ghost of a Marowak haunts the Pokemon Tower in Lavender Town, a spirit that cannot move on. This ghost is Cubone's mother. The lonely little creature walking around wearing a skull is walking around wearing its mother. Section 8. Scrapped and Beta Concepts. The Pokemon that almost were fact number 69. For every Pokemon that made it into the final games, there are believed to be dozens of designs that were created and discarded. Game Freak's design process involves intensive iteration, drawing many options before selecting the ones that make it through. Some of these discards are known through leaks, interviews, and the Space World demo. Others are referenced in passing by designers. The totality of what was considered and rejected in the history of Pokemon would likely be staggering. Fact number 70. In the early development of Generation 1, there were plans to include a Pokemon that looked like a small goblin or imp, with a design significantly different from any creature that made it into the final games. This creature is sometimes referenced in early promotional materials and design documents as a placeholder. When the Space World 1997 demo was leaked, similar early-stage creatures were revealed. Designs that were clearly in the same developmental lineage as the final game, but had not yet been refined into the smooth, marketable forms that would appear on cards and plush toys. Fact number 71. One of the most discussed near-inclusions in Generation 2 is an early version of what appears to have been a pre-evolution for Farfetch'd, the single-stage duck Pokemon with the leak. Farfetch'd has been a single-stage Pokemon since Generation 1 and has historically been one of the only creatures in the original 151 without an evolutionary connection to anything else. In the Space World 1997 demo data, there's evidence of a creature that may have been intended as a related form. Whether this was a pre-evolution, an evolution, or simply a thematic relative is not entirely clear from the data. But the implication is that Farfetch'd was not always meant to be alone. Fact number 72. Generation 2 originally planned to include evolutions for multiple Generation 1 Pokemon that were ultimately cut. The Space World demo contained data for Pokemon that included evolved forms of several creatures who currently have no evolutions in the main series. Among the most discussed, an evolution for Meowth, an evolution for Omanite's line, and what appears to have been a different evolutionary path for Jynx. These designs were removed at some point between the 1997 demo and the 1999 release, either because they didn't fit the final game's vision, because the design team felt the original forms were complete, or for reasons that have never been stated publicly. The question of why these evolutions were cut, and whether they will someday be incorporated into future games, has occupied portions of the fan community for years. Fact number 73. There is a Pokemon in the data of Ruby and Sapphire that was never officially released, and exists only as a mystery. Jirachi's thematic opposite. Actually, the more accurate version of the story involves the Pokemon known as Deoxys, which was discovered in the code of Ruby and Sapphire by data miners before it had been announced. Deoxys, the DNA Pokemon with 4 different forms corresponding to attack, defense, speed, and its normal configuration, was hidden in the game data without any in-game method of obtaining it. Its existence was confirmed when the data was found, creating the distinctive anticipatory excitement of a secret that has been discovered but not yet explained. This pattern, Pokemon hidden in game data, discovered by the community, eventually distributed through events, became a recurring feature of the franchise's relationship with its players. Fact number 74. The move cut. One of the most used and most complained about HM moves in the early games, was originally intended to have more significant gameplay applications. In early designs and interviews, cut was meant to interact with the environment in more varied ways, cutting down different types of foliage, revealing paths that were not merely cosmetic. In the final games, cut primarily removes small bushes and trees that are blocking paths. It is useful exactly once per location and then forgotten. Its place on a Pokemon's moveset is dead weight. This is why dedicated players used to maintain a HM slave, a Pokemon, usually something weak and otherwise unused, that existed solely to learn Cut, Surf, Strength, Flash, and the other field moves necessary to progress through the game without polluting the movesets of the Pokemon they actually intended to battle with. The whole concept of the HM slave is a kind of creative workaround for a design decision that, in retrospect, even its creators seem to have recognized as imperfect. Generation 6 removed the HM system almost entirely. Fact number 75. Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, released in 2002 in Japan and 2003 in North America, famously lacked any way to transfer Pokemon from Gold and Silver, creating what fans call the GBA gap. When Ruby and Sapphire launched, they were entirely incompatible with the previous generations of games. Pokemon from Gold and Silver could not be brought forward. The 251 creatures of Johto, including Pokemon unavailable in Hoenn, were simply inaccessible unless you used the Fire Red and Leaf Green games released in 2004, which allowed limited transfer of original 151 Pokemon to Ruby and Sapphire through a mechanism called the PAL Park. The GBA gap created a genuine sense of severance for players. The feeling that this new generation was a fresh start rather than a continuation, which was disorienting for those who had built teams in Gold and Silver. The lesson Game Freak learned from this response shaped later decisions about intergenerational compatibility, which became increasingly robust in subsequent generations. Fact number 76. One of the most beloved unused locations in any Pokemon game is Mirage Island in Ruby and Sapphire, a place that almost nobody ever saw legitimately. Mirage Island is an island visible from a house in Pacifid Log Town. An old man in the house looks out his window every day and tells you whether he can see it. On the vast majority of days, he cannot. Mirage Island appears only when a specific number in the game data matches a random number generated fresh each day. A probability of roughly 1 in 65,535. If Mirage Island appears, you can visit it. It contains only two things: a field of lychee berries and a wild patch of why-nots. That is all. After all that rarity, after all that anticipation, a berry patch and a patch of baby Pokemon. The deflation is itself part of the mythology. Mirage Island was not magnificent. It was just there. And that ordinariness, so carefully guarded by such extreme improbability, made it feel more mysterious than any legendary Pokemon could. Section 9. The Modern Era. From Sinnoh to Paldea Fact number 77. Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, released in 2006 in Japan and 2007 in North America, introduced a mythology so ambitious and cosmologically expansive that it arguably surpassed everything that had come before. The Sinnoh region contained, encoded in its landscape and its legends, a creation myth for the entire Pokemon universe. Dialga governs time. Palkia governs space. Giratina governs antimatter and rules over a parallel dimension called the Distortion World. Arceus, who sits at the top of this cosmology described as having created the universe by spinning its 1,000 arms, is the supreme deity, sleeping at the summit of a mountain called Mount Coronet, accessible only after the player has gathered specific items and played a specific piece of music on a specific device. Fact number 78. The creation mythology of Sinnoh is encoded in a document called the Sinnoh Myths, tablets found scattered throughout the region, each containing a fragment of a larger story. The tablets describe Arceus shaping the world, creating Dialga and Palkia to give it time and space, and eventually retreating into slumber when its work was done. They reference the late Guardians, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf, as the beings that brought knowledge, emotion, and willpower to living things. Without these three gifts, the tablets suggest, life would be possible but would have no meaning. It is an ambitious mythology for a game aimed primarily at children. It is also a genuinely coherent one, internally consistent, with a clear cosmological structure that holds together under examination. The Sinnoh myths feel like they were written not as game text, but as something older and realer, the way true myths feel older and realer than the cultures that preserve them. Fact number 79. Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, the 2009 remakes of Gold and Silver, included a feature in which every Pokemon in your party would follow you on the overworld, visible behind your character as you walked. This feature, first introduced in Yellow for Pikachu alone, was extended to all 493 Pokemon available in the game. Every creature that could walk would walk behind you. Creatures that couldn't walk, water Pokemon for instance, would be depicted in ways appropriate to their nature. Magikarp would flop along behind you. Geodude would float. Each Pokemon had multiple idle animations and would occasionally stop to look at something, sneeze, stretch, or otherwise demonstrate personality. Players quickly noted that their Pokemon would comment differently on different locations. Arriving at a Pokemon Center, certain Pokemon would look relieved. Standing in front of the ruins of Alph, psychic types would sometimes look thoughtful or uneasy. These were minor details, but they accumulated into the powerful sense that the Pokemon were not statistics, but companions. Fact number 80. Pokemon Black and White, released in 2010 in Japan and 2011 internationally, are frequently cited as the most narratively ambitious games in the series. The story of Black and White centers on Team Plasma, a villainous organization that advocates for the liberation of Pokemon from human trainers, and whose argument, articulated by the charismatic N and his ideological father Ghetsis, is presented with enough genuine philosophical weight that players are asked to actually think about it rather than simply dismiss it. N believes sincerely and not incorrectly that using Pokemon for human purposes is a form of exploitation. The game gives him scenes of real emotional complexity, a childhood spent with abused Pokemon, a genuine love for the creatures he champions, a blindness to the ways his father is using him. He is the most interesting villain in the series, in part because he is not entirely wrong. Fact number 81. The Unova region, the setting of Black and White, was directly based on New York City. Specifically New York City in the early 2000s, when the design team visited the city for research. The central hub of Unova, Castelia City, is modeled on Manhattan, with its tall buildings, grid streets, and bustling port. Black City and White Forest represent two different possible versions of the same terrain, urban and natural, depending on which version you play. The Nimbasa City sports facilities evoke the spirit of American sports culture. The regional design was an explicit attempt to create a Pokemon setting that felt distinctly different from the Japanese and European inspirations of previous regions. Fact number 82. Pokemon X and Y Custom Mata, released in 2013 as the first main series games on the Nintendo 3DS, introduced Mega Evolution, a mechanic in which certain Pokemon could achieve a temporary powered-up form during battle. Mega Evolution was accompanied by a mythological backstory involving a catastrophic war in the Kalos region's past, a king who used the power of life and death to save his Pokemon companion, and a corrupting energy called the Ultimate Weapon that destroyed an entire civilization in the process. This backstory, explored through incidental dialogue and a few pivotal cutscenes, gave Kalos a texture of ancient tragedy beneath its French-inspired charm. Mega Charizard, Mega Blastoise, and Mega Venusaur were announced before the games launched and generated massive excitement among adult fans who had grown up with the original 151. Game Freak understood that the adults who had been children in 1999 were now a significant part of their audience, and that giving those adults a powered-up version of their childhood partners was something close to irresistible. Fact number 83. Pokemon Go, launched in July 2016, became a cultural phenomenon so large and so sudden that it briefly registered on public health data. The game, developed by Niantic in partnership with the Pokemon Company and Nintendo, used augmented reality to overlay Pokemon on the real world, visible through the camera of a smartphone. Players had to physically walk to encounter Pokemon, visit Pokestops at real-world locations, and gather at gyms to battle for control. In the weeks after launch, pedestrian traffic in parks and public spaces measurably increased in cities across the world. People who had not left their apartments for days were going outside. Grandparents were playing Pokemon Go with their grandchildren. The Centers for Disease Control in the United States noted, with evident bemused optimism, that the game was associated with increased physical activity in its users. Fact number 84. Pokemon Go also generated its share of incidents. Players walked into traffic, trespassed on restricted properties, gathered in inappropriate locations, and occasionally clashed with one another in public spaces. The Niantic team made rapid adjustments in response, adding safety reminders to the loading screen and, in subsequent updates, refining the mapping of Pokestop locations to remove spots that had generated complaints. But the fundamental experience of living briefly in a world where the hedge at the end of your street might conceal a Pikachu was new and remarkable, and no amount of incidents entirely erased the giddiness of those first weeks. Fact number 85. Pokemon Legends Arceus, released in January 2022, changed the fundamental structure of a main series Pokemon game for the first time in 25 years. Rather than navigating between routes and cities in a largely linear fashion, Legends Arceus placed the player in large open areas that could be explored freely, with Pokemon roaming visibly and behaving more like wild animals. Some curious, some cautious, some aggressive. The player could sneak through tall grass, observe Pokemon from a distance, throw Pokeballs directly at unsuspecting Pokemon, and generally engage with the world in ways that felt physical and immediate rather than mediated through battle menus. The game was set in a historical version of the Sinnoh region, the Hisui region, at a time when humans and Pokemon were still learning to coexist. The story had a weight and melancholy unusual for the series. An outsider thrown back in time trying to survive in a world that did not know what they were, building a relationship with Pokemon from the very beginning. Fact number 86. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, released in November 2022, were the first truly open-world Pokemon games. And they launched in a state that attracted significant attention for technical performance issues. The games were beautiful in concept and often in execution. A large, sunlit region called Paldea, inspired by the Iberian Peninsula, with Pokemon roaming freely in every environment, a non-linear story structure that could be approached in any order, and some of the most emotionally resonant storytelling the series had ever attempted. But the games ran at variable frame rates on the Nintendo Switch hardware, with visible rendering issues in some areas that were widely shared and discussed. The dichotomy between the game's genuine artistic ambition and their technical execution became one of the central conversations about the Pokemon franchise's development practices. Whether the annual release schedule allowed sufficient time for polish, and what the expectations for a game in the most commercially successful media franchise in history should be. Fact number 87. The storyline of the Way Hometown, the narrative conclusion of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, is widely considered among the most emotionally affecting sequences in the series' history. Without going into extensive detail, the ending involves a companion character who has sacrificed something enormous, a landscape that operates as both literal and metaphorical space, and a farewell that asks the player to let go of something they have come to love. Players who completed it described sitting with the credits in a way they hadn't since the summit of Mount. Silver and gold and silver, not celebrating exactly, but feeling something. That the games ran poorly made this emotional achievement more remarkable, not less. Game Freak had created something genuinely moving on hardware that was groaning under the weight of it. Section 10. Design inspirations, localization, and the final 15 fact number 88. Sably, the small dark and ghost-type Pokemon from Generation 3, is believed to have been inspired by a specific real-world incident, the 1955 Kelly Hopkinsville encounter. The Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, also called the Hopkinsville Goblin case, was a reported event in rural Kentucky in which a farm family claimed to have been terrorized through the night by small, glowing-eyed, dark-colored beings that moved in unusual ways and could not be harmed by gunfire. The creatures described, small, silver, with enormous eyes, bear a notable resemblance to Sably's design. Small body, huge gem-like eyes that catch the light, dark coloring, and something distinctly alien about the overall form. Whether this was a deliberate reference or a coincidental convergence of design instincts towards small, big-eyed, dark creature, the parallel is striking. Fact number 89, Gardevoir, the psychic and fairy-type Pokemon from Generation 3, was designed around the concept of unwavering protective loyalty. Its Pokédex entries describe a Gardevoir that would create a small black hole to protect its trainer if necessary, even at the cost of its own life. The design, elegant, flowing, with a suggestion of formal clothing, evokes the aesthetics of courtly devotion and fairy tale loyalty. The knight who would die for the person they serve, the attendant who asks for nothing and gives everything. This design philosophy is why Gardevoir became one of the franchise's most beloved Pokemon. It embodies a very specific emotional fantasy, being protected, being valued, being the person that someone with extraordinary power chooses to care for. Fact number 90. The localization of Pokemon names from Japanese to English is one of the great ongoing works of creative translation and entertainment. The Japanese names for Pokemon are often constructed differently than the English ones, using puns, references, and word constructions that operate in Japanese phonetics and kanji logic. The English localizers at Nintendo Treehouse and at the various localization teams over the years had to find equivalents that captured the same spirit while functioning in English, often with the additional constraint that the name had to be distinctive, pronounceable by children, and safe for trademark registration in multiple territories. Fact number 91. Some Pokemon names were carried over largely intact from Japanese, while others were substantially reimagined. Pikachu, for example, is the same in Japanese and English. The name is constructed from pika, a Japanese onomatopoeia for a sparkling or electric sound, and chu, an onomatopoeia for a mouse squeak. The name is essentially electric mouse sound, and it works in any language because it is onomatopoeic. By contrast, the English name Haunter replaced the Japanese ghost, literally, and Gengar replaced the Japanese name that was a corruption of doppelganger. The original names were direct, where the English names became more evocative and atmospheric. Fact number 92. The infamous Onigiri incident, in which 4 kids painted rice balls into donuts, was part of a broader localization philosophy that has since fallen substantially out of fashion. The thinking behind this approach was that American children in the late 1990s would not recognize Japanese food and might find it off-putting or confusing. This assumption was both paternalistic and, in retrospect, simply wrong. American children were perfectly capable of encountering new foods and media without confusion, and many would have welcomed the exposure. Subsequent localization of Pokemon and other Japanese entertainment has moved significantly toward preserving cultural specificity rather than erasing it, recognizing that cultural difference is a feature rather than a bug. That part of what makes Japanese entertainment interesting to international audiences is precisely its Japaneseness. Fact number 93. In Germany, the Pokemon anime was dubbed with a voice cast that had a notably different sonic quality from both the American 4Kids dub and the Japanese original. The German dub developed its own devoted audience and produced character voice performances that many German fans considered definitive. When the dub cast was changed at certain points in the series, the reaction from German-speaking audiences was significant. A reminder that localized voice performances can carry as much emotional weight for their audiences as any other aspect of the work. This is a broader truth about Pokemon. The franchise exists in dozens of versions simultaneously, each shaped by the cultural and linguistic context of its localization, each equally real and legitimate to the audience that grew up with it. Fact number 94. Pokemon Snap, released for the Nintendo 64 in 1999, placed the player in a fixed vehicle traveling through a nature preserve, tasked with photographing Pokemon in their natural habitats. The game was unusual in every respect. It had no battles, no catching, no leveling. It was a photography game about observation, about noticing that a Scyther is hiding in a particular patch of grass, about understanding that throwing an apple at just the right moment would cause a Pidgey to take flight in a photogenic way. It rewarded patience, curiosity, and attention. At certain Blockbuster Video and other retail locations, players could bring their Nintendo 64 cartridges and print out their best photographs as stickers. You could take your best shot of Pikachu and have it emerge printed on sticker paper from a machine at a video rental store. The physical and digital worlds met in a small, warm, tangible way. Fact number 95. Pokemon has been the subject of serious academic study in fields ranging from psychology to evolutionary biology. A 2019 study published in the journal Nature Human Behavior found that adults who played Pokemon extensively as children showed distinctive patterns of neural activity in the ventral visual stream when viewing Pokemon images, a region of the brain associated with object recognition. The Pokemon selective activity was located in a specific subregion that previous research had associated with recognizing small, centrally fixated objects encountered during childhood. In other words, growing up with Pokemon changed the physical structure of how these adults' brains process visual information. The game did not just leave memories, it left a mark on the neural architecture of the people who played it. Fact number 96. The Pokemon Center in Tokyo, a retail store dedicated entirely to Pokemon merchandise, regularly generates lines of customers that stretch around the block before it opens. The stores, which exist in multiple cities in Japan and in a growing number of international locations, sell merchandise ranging from small plush figures to elaborate home goods, and they include product lines that change seasonally. Visiting a Pokemon Center is, for many fans, a pilgrimage, a physical location where the franchise exists at full intensity with no dilution or compromise. Fact number 97. The music of the Pokemon games has been composed primarily by a small team of composers over the series' history, with Junichi Masuda composing large portions of the early soundtracks before transitioning to a directorial role. Masuda's compositions for the original games, the Pallet Town theme, the Route 1 music, the Pokemon Center jingle, have achieved a level of cultural penetration that goes well beyond gaming. The Pokemon Center music in particular has become a meme-adjacent piece of audio shorthand for safety, rest, and restoration. A quiet room, a pink counter, everything healed, everything fine. Fact number 98. The Pokemon world's geography across all regions can be loosely mapped onto the real-world geography of Japan. Kanto corresponds to the Kanto region of Japan where Tokyo sits. Johto corresponds to the Kansai region, home to Kyoto and Osaka. Hoenn is loosely based on the Kyushu island. Sinnoh corresponds to Hokkaido, the northernmost of Japan's main islands. The later regions draw from further afield: Unova from New York, Kalos from France, Alola from Hawaii, Galar from the United Kingdom, Paldea from Spain. But the original four were all, in a meaningful sense, maps of the country that created them. Fact number 99. Ash's Charizard is one of the most discussed character arcs in the history of the Pokemon anime, and its core dynamic is one of difficult love. Charmander, the original fire starter, was abandoned on a rock by a trainer who lied to it and told it he would return. Ash found it, took it in, and cared for it. Charmander evolved into Charmeleon, and then into Charizard, and at that point, fully evolved and powerful, the Pokemon stopped obeying Ash entirely. For multiple seasons of the anime, Charizard would simply lie down during battles, refusing to fight, occasionally turning its flame breath on Ash himself out of disdain. This was not villainy. It was adolescent intractability, the specific frustration of a strong creature that has not yet decided whether this human is worth trusting. Ash earned Charizard's respect not through force or rewards, but through something much harder: staying. Being there, sitting in the rain with it when no one else would. When Charizard finally obeyed, in a moment so effective that it has been re-watched millions of times, it was not because Ash had become more powerful. It was because Ash had proven, by quiet, sustained presence, that he was not going anywhere. Fact number 100. The 100th fact is the first Pokemon. Not numerically first, Ulasad, Bulbasaur holds that distinction. But the first Pokemon ever designed, according to the available evidence, was Raiden, the large rhinoceros-like rock and ground type that stands at number 112 in the original Pokédex. Raiden was used as a test model during the earliest prototype phases of the game, when the developers needed a three-dimensional figure to test their rendering engine. It was big enough to be distinctive, simple enough to be rendered on limited hardware, and animal-like enough to test the proportions and movement of a creature in digital space. Every Pokemon that came after, Pikachu, Charizard, Mewtwo, every creature in every game for 3 decades, exists in a lineage that begins with a large gray rhino serving as a test dummy in a small Tokyo studio sometime around 1990. The final 15. Facts 101 through 165. And now, as the night deepens and your breathing slows, we come to the final chapter of our long journey. The last 65 facts, offered gently, one after another, like the last pages of a very good book that you were almost sorry to finish. Fact number 101. No Pokemon has ever been definitively confirmed dead in the main series games, but the Ghost-type classification has always implied that some Pokemon are effectively the spirits of deceased beings. This ambiguity is one of the franchise's most thoughtfully maintained silences. Fact number 102. The move Metronome, which causes the user to randomly use almost any move in the game, was introduced in Generation 1 as a playful acknowledgement of chaos. Competitive players who restrict themselves to metronome-only battles call this format Metronome Battle, and it produces some of the most unexpected and improbable outcomes in all of competitive Pokemon play. Fact number 103. Smeargle, the painting Pokemon introduced in Generation 2, can learn almost any move in the game through its unique ability. Sketch Bamadias, which permanently copies the last move used by an opponent. This makes Smeargle theoretically the most versatile Pokemon in the series, capable of using moves that its own type and stats would otherwise make nonsensical. Fact number 104. Wobbuffet cannot learn any attacking moves. Its 4 moves are all either counter moves, counter, mirror coat, or stalling moves, safeguard encore. It is a Pokemon that exists entirely in reaction. It can only respond to what others do. In competitive play, it was so effective at trapping and defeating opponents through sheer reaction that it was banned from many formats. Fact number 105. The Pokemon Unknown, those alphabetic psychic-type creatures, include symbols for exclamation marks and question marks, meaning the unknown alphabet contains not just letters, but punctuation. The full set of Unknown, if assembled as text, could theoretically be used to write a complete sentence. Fact number 106. In the original Generation 1 games, Psychic-type Pokemon had effectively no counters. Ghost types, which should have been super effective against Psychic, were actually non-functional against them due to a programming bug. This meant that the all-Psychic team of the Elite Four's Sabrina was genuinely one of the hardest challenges in the game for players who hadn't specifically prepared for it. Fact number 107. The move Hyper Beam in Generation 1 did not require a recharge turn if it knocked out the opposing Pokemon. This means that a Pokemon using Hyper Beam on the last opposing Pokemon never had to rest, making it dramatically more powerful in that generation than in all subsequent ones. The exploit defined competitive play at high levels for years. Fact number 108. Tauros was so dominant in early competitive Pokemon play that it was the primary Pokemon on virtually every top-level tournament team in the game's first years. The Pokemon Ash used in the Indigo League anime, his 30 Tauros all caught in the Safari Zone, reflected real competitive truth. Tauros was simply the best. Fact number 109. Smogon University, the largest and most influential competitive Pokemon community, takes its name from Koffing's Japanese name, Smogon. The community began on online forums in the early 2000s as a way to organize and standardize competitive play, and it now maintains tier lists damage calculators, and detailed strategic analyses for every generation of competitive play simultaneously. Fact number 110. The sleep clause, a competitive rule that prevents a player from putting more than one of their opponent's Pokemon to sleep at a time, was introduced to prevent the most oppressive strategies of early competitive play, particularly teams built around Jynx and Gengar's combination of sleep-inducing and devastating attacks. Fact number 111. Professor Oak's final internal Pokédex completion message in the original games, received when you have caught all 151 Pokémon, simply reads, "Congratulations! A new world of dreams and adventures with Pokémon awaits. Gotta catch 'em all!" It does not unlock any special content. There is no secret. There is just the acknowledgement that you completed something and an invitation to imagine what comes next. Fact number 112. The Pokemon franchise has sold over 440 million video games as of recent accounting, making it the best-selling video game franchise in history. This number does not include trading cards, anime, merchandise, or the revenues of Pokemon Go, which crossed $1 billion in revenue within its first 7 months. Fact number 113. The starter Pokemon of every generation have been designed to maintain a grass, fire, water elemental triangle of type advantages. But this triangle is complicated by the final evolved forms, many of which have secondary types that change the calculations significantly. A fully knowledgeable player choosing a starter based purely on type matchup optimization would need to account not just for the final type of the starter, but for the team composition they plan to build around it. Fact number 114. The soundtrack to Pokemon Diamond and Pearl is widely regarded as among the most sophisticated in the series, specifically for the way Hitomi Sato and Junichi Masuda used layered MIDI arrangements to create music that evolved as you moved between areas. The theme of the Spear Pillar, the location where you confront Dialga and Palkia, is almost orchestral in its ambition, a piece of video game music that captures the scale of confronting the gods of time and space in a way that smaller or quieter music could not. Fact number 115. In Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, there's a gap in the Pokédex between the last entry in the game's regional Pokédex and the first. Specifically, there is a numerical gap that corresponds to a creature that, within the mythology of the game, is said to exist in a place outside normal space. This gap, this blank entry, is not an accident or a programming error. It is a designed absence, a space in the list where something is missing, and it corresponds to Giratina, the antimatter Pokemon which exists in the Distortion world and cannot be located on any conventional map. The game's own Pokédex has a hole in it, and that hole is exactly Giratina-shaped. Fact number 116. Every evolution of Eevee is designed around a specific emotional archetype. Vaporeon, fluid, dreaming, half dissolved into water. Jolteon, anxious, electric, sharp-edged. Flareon, warm, loyal, slow-burning. Espeon, cool, perceptive, loyal in a watchful way. Umbreon, calm, patient, protective in the dark. Leafeon, still, natural, unbothered. Glaceon, precise, cold, inwardly complex. Sylveon, tender, bonding-driven, the love type made manifest. Each one is a way of being, a temperament, a mode of meeting the world. The fan tendency to identify strongly with a specific evolution, "I'm definitely an Umbreon," reflects the degree to which these designs have been constructed, not just as Pokemon, but as archetypes of personality. Fact number 117. The Pokemon world contains a number of locations that serve as clear metaphors for aspects of human experience that are rarely addressed in children's entertainment. The Lost Hotel in Kalos is populated by Pokemon who have been discarded by their trainers, abandoned, left behind, living in the spaces between functional society. The game does not comment heavily on this. It simply shows you the place and lets you draw your conclusions. Fact number 118. The move Judgment, used exclusively by Arceus, changes its type based on which plate item Arceus holds. If Arceus holds no plate at all, Judgment is normal type. This means that the god of the Pokemon universe, in its most natural, unmodified state, is a normal type. The type most associated with ordinary creatures, with unexceptionalism, with the creatures that are like everything and nothing all at once. The supreme divine being of the Pokemon universe is, at its core, ordinary. Something to sit with. Fact number 119. In Pokemon X and Y, there's a pianist NPC in Lumiose City, the game's central hub, based on Paris, who will play the piano theme from a previous game if you have save data from it on your 3DS. The specific song played depends on which previous game's data is detected. This small, almost invisible feature is purely for the player's emotional experience. It rewards no items. It unlocks nothing. It simply plays a piece of music that the player might remember from an earlier journey. It is a tiny act of acknowledgement. I know where you have been. Here's a song from there. Fact number 120. The National Pokédex, the complete record of all Pokemon across all games, was removed as a feature in Pokemon Sword and Shield, replaced by a regional Pokédex that included only a subset of all Pokemon. This decision, announced in 2019, was called the Dexit controversy by fans, with Dexit being a portmanteau of Dex, as in Pokédex, and Exit. The reaction was substantial. Fans who had carefully maintained collections of every Pokemon across multiple games, transferring them through generation through the Pokemon Bank and home services, were upset to discover that their full rosters could not participate in the new games. Game Freak's explanation that the increased graphical fidelity of the new games made it impractical to include and animate all 890-plus Pokemon was debated energetically by a community that felt the explanation insufficient for the scale of the exclusion. Fact number 121. The Orange Islands arc of the Pokemon anime, in which Ash travels a tropical island chain instead of a traditional region, was produced largely as a stopgap while the Gen 2 games were still in development and the production team could not yet adapt their storylines. The Orange Islands arc introduced a substitute for the traditional badge quest, featured the legendary Pokemon Lugia in the accompanying theatrical film, and gave the series' recurring cast a relaxed, vacation-like interlude between the intensity of the Kanto journey and the new pressures of Johto. It is, in retrospect, one of the anime's most pleasant stretches. Loose, warm, exploratory, precisely because it had no heavy destination to reach. Fact number 122. Pikachu in Pokemon Yellow has a friendship system that affects the game in a way not fully documented in any official material at the time. If Pikachu's friendship value drops to 0, achieved through repeatedly fainting in battle, using bitter healing items or other neglect, Pikachu will refuse to enter its Pokeball and will show negative emotions when checked. Conversely, at maximum friendship, Pikachu becomes more expressive and happier in its animations. But there is an additional hidden behavior. If Pikachu's friendship is at a specific intermediate value at a specific location in the game, a girl character in Cerulean City will give you a Bulbasaur, but only if Pikachu is happy enough. The game does not explain what happy enough means. It simply makes the gift conditional on a relationship the game has been quietly measuring from the beginning. Fact number 123. The English-language PokéRap, a rapid-fire song listing all 151 original Pokemon, broadcast on the American version of the anime, contains at least one error. Poliwag is listed in a position and rhythm slot that suggests it was substituted for another Pokemon at some point during production. Whether this was a last-minute change, a production error, or simply a consequence of the extremely tight production timeline for the original American release is not known. The Pokerap existed in a different form in Japan, and the English version required considerable reworking to fit the new names and maintain the scansion. The fact that it nearly rhymes and almost scans all the way through 151 names at that speed is itself remarkable. Fact number 124. Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, the 2004 remakes of the original Generation 1 games, added an entire new area called the CV Islands that was not present in the originals. The CVI Islands contained storylines involving Team Rocket, additional Pokemon from Gold and Silver, and environmental details that fleshed out the world of Kanto in ways the original games hadn't. More significantly, they allowed the transfer of Pokemon from Fire Red and Leaf Green to Ruby and Sapphire, bridging the GBA gap and reconnecting the franchise's history in a way that felt like relief. Fact number 125. Every Pokemon game has contained hidden developers' rooms or test areas, accessible only through glitches or specific cheating methods. Spaces clearly not intended for the player that nonetheless reveal something about the development process. These include simple grid-square test maps, areas with placeholder textures, locations where item and battle scripts were tested before being placed in the final game, and occasionally notes or text left by developers that were never intended to be read. The existence of these spaces is a reminder that every game is, before it is a finished product, a workshop, a messy, iterative space where things are tried and discarded and reconsidered until something close to what was imagined finally emerges. Fact number 126. The Pokemon Mew was designed by Shigeki Morimoto, a programmer rather than an artist, which perhaps explains why its design is so simple compared to many of its contemporaries. A small pink oval with a long tail and large eyes, a creature reduced to the absolute minimum that still reads as a living thing. Morimoto has described hiding Mew in the game data at the end of development as a kind of private joke or bonus, something for players to find if they looked carefully enough. He did not know that Mew would become one of the most famous creatures in the franchise. He was just a programmer, sneaking a little extra something into a game he was proud of at the last possible moment before it shipped. Fact number 127. The legendary distribution pattern across the Pokemon games has always followed a rough tripartite structure. One Pokemon associated with the physical world, one with the spirit world, and one that mediates between them. This is most explicit in Sinnoh, with Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, but it appears in some form in every generation. The three legendary birds of Kanto are associated with ice, lightning, and fire. Three elemental extremes balanced against one another. The three legendary beasts of Johto are associated with lightning, fire, and water, the elements of a natural catastrophe reborn. The structure suggests a mythological thinking that runs beneath the surface of the franchise, a cosmological consistency quietly maintained across decades. Fact number 128. The Pokemon Company International, the entity that manages the franchise outside of Japan, maintains offices in Bellevue, Washington, London, England, and Hamburg, Germany, among other locations. The existence of these offices in those specific cities reflects the franchise's three core international markets: North America, the United Kingdom, and continental Europe. The largest Pokemon Go events, the most heavily attended trading card game tournaments, and the highest attended live performances of the Pokemon Symphony Orchestra concert series all tend to cluster in cities served by these three offices. Fact number 129. The Pokemon Symphony, an orchestral concert series featuring live performance of Pokemon music, has toured internationally and sold out major concert halls in numerous cities. Orchestras perform arrangements of themes from across the entire franchise's history, accompanied by video from the games and anime. Adults who played the original games as children sit in concert halls and hear, performed by full orchestra, the music that once came out of a small speaker in a gray handheld device. The experience of this, the scale of it, the formality of it, the recognition that something from your childhood has grown large enough to fill Carnegie Hall, is one of the more poignant expressions of how thoroughly Pokemon has embedded itself in the culture. Fact number 130. The Pokemon world does not explain where Pokemon eggs come from. Pokemon breeding, introduced in Generation 2 as a game mechanic, at the daycare, produces eggs that hatch into baby Pokemon. The daycare workers will tell you, with careful evasion, that they found an egg before they knew it. Professor Elm, when informed that the Paimon left at the daycare has produced an egg, says that he has no idea how it happened and that it is a mystery. The franchise, which is comfortable describing a god creating the universe and ghosts eating the dreams of children, declines to explain where babies come from. Fact number 131. The Pokemon Ditto can transform into any other Pokemon, a perfect visual copy complete with the same moves. Its relationship to the franchise's mythology has generated extensive speculation. Its origin is unexplained. Its relationship to Mew, which also has the ability to transform, has been the subject of a persistent fan theory suggesting that Ditto are failed clones of Mew, abandoned experiments scattered through the world. This theory has never been confirmed. It also has never been denied. The silence around it is comfortable, and it sits in the gap between official and unofficial lore, like Ditto itself sits in any form it happens to occupy, fitting perfectly, revealing nothing. Fact number 132. The move Splash, as established earlier, does nothing. But in the Pokemon manga series, and in certain supplementary materials, the move is treated with more dignity than the games suggest it deserves. In the manga, the move is sometimes depicted as having spiritual or ceremonial significance. A display, not an attack, something performed because it must be performed, rather than because it accomplishes anything measurable. This gap between game mechanics and supplementary lore is one of the franchise's most charming features. The games say one thing, the surrounding media says something else, and in the space between them, a creature can be simultaneously the most useless combatant imaginable and something with its own quiet dignity. Fact number 133. The original Pokemon anime featured a character named Brock, who closed his eyes almost every time he appeared on screen. This was initially a design choice to make him look perpetually calm and collected. It subsequently became one of the most immediately recognizable visual shorthand cues in the history of children's animation. Brock's voice actor in the original 4Kids dub, Eric Stewart, has noted in interviews that Brock was a favorite character to voice precisely because of his combination of earnestness, comic failure, and genuine warmth. The character who fell in love with every girl he met, who cooked for his friends, who stayed calm in crises, who carried the emotional weight of the group, he was defined by a pair of eyes that never opened and a heart that never closed. Fact number 134. The final gym leaders in each regional Pokemon game have always been designed to be significantly more difficult than the ones preceding them. But the level of difficulty has shifted across generations. In the original games, Giovanni, the ground-type specialist and secret team Rocket Leader, was markedly harder than the 7 gym leaders before him. In subsequent games, final gym leaders were often designed to be narratively as well as mechanically challenging. Boss Raihan in Sword and Shield, Hapu in Sun and Moon, Volkner in Diamond and Pearl. Each represents not just a battle challenge, but a statement about the region. The final gym is what the region has been building toward, its highest expression of the local approach to Pokemon training. Fact number 135. The move Tackle, one of the first moves learned by most starter Pokemon, a basic physical attack with modest power, has been in every mainline Pokemon game since Generation 1. It is, in the most literal sense, the beginning of almost every Pokemon journey, the very first move you use against the very first opponent you face in the very first route of whichever game you start with. Tackle is not impressive. It is not memorable. It will be replaced quickly by moves more powerful and specialized. But it is there at the start, every time, for every trainer. The first small act in a very long story. Fact number 136. The Pokemon anime has a tradition, maintained across almost every season, of ending each episode with Pikachu looking into the camera and saying its name. A kind of direct address to the audience. A small moment of connection between the franchise and whoever is watching. Children watching the anime learned to expect this. It became part of the rhythm of watching Pokemon. Not a surprise, not a dramatic moment, just a gentle acknowledgement. You watch this. We see you. Here is Pikachu looking at you saying the only word it knows. Fact number 137. There are more individual Pokemon trading cards in existence, across all prints, all languages, all sets, than there are individual Pokemon. The number of unique cards has long since exceeded 10,000, with new sets released on a regular schedule throughout the calendar year. The volume of product produced and the scope of the collecting undertaking for anyone attempting to maintain a complete set across all languages and editions is genuinely staggering. Fact number 138. The Pokemon franchise first appeared in animated form, not with the main anime series, but with a short film called Pikachu's Vacation, which was shown in Japanese theaters as a featurette before the first Pokemon theatrical film in 1998. Pikachu's Vacation had no human characters and no dialogue, only Pokemon communicating in their own sounds, going to a theme park together, and having a pleasant time. It was, in essence, a 15-minute proof of concept that Pokemon were characters in their own right, capable of carrying an emotional narrative without human intermediaries. Fact number 139. The Pokemon games have been localized into numerous languages, including English, German, French, Spanish, Italian, Korean, Chinese, traditional, Chinese, simplified, and Portuguese. A suite of languages that reflects the franchise's global reach and the specific markets that the Pokemon Company has prioritized. Each localization involves not just translation of text, but adaptation of cultural references, adjustment of humor, and occasionally redesign of text-based elements. The sheer volume of text in a modern Pokemon game, NPC dialogue, item descriptions, move descriptions, Pokédex entries, makes this an enormous undertaking with each new release. Fact number 140. The Pokemon Eternatus, introduced in Sword and Shield as the legendary underpinning the game's Dynamax mechanic, was designed to be genuinely disturbing. A cosmic, skeletal alien creature that was responsible for an apocalyptic event in the Galar region's past and whose energy was being harvested by a powerful corporation. The corporate villain element of Sword and Shield, Macrocosmos and its chairman Rose, represented an unusual direction for Pokemon antagonists. Not a criminal organization with supernatural ambitions, not a misguided idealist, but a businessman who believed, sincerely and with terrible wrongheadedness, that sacrificing the present to guarantee the future was the correct calculation. It was for a franchise whose villains had previously included an insect cult, a weather terrorist, and a Pokemon supremacist, a distinctly contemporary form of evil. Fact number 141. Professor Sycamore of the Kalos region, the Pokemon professor in X and Y, is the only Pokemon professor in the series who can be battled. All Pokemon professors are associated with a tree or plant. Oak, elm, birch, rowan, juniper, sycamore, kukui, who is associated with the kukui nut, Magnolia, and so on. Sycamore unusually challenges the player to a battle early in the game and remains as a presence throughout, more of a mentor in the traditional sense, someone who actively participates in your journey rather than simply pointing you toward it. Fact number 142. The Pokemon Minccino, introduced in Generation 5, cleans with its tail. And according to its Pokédex entry, it will clean filthy things it finds because it cannot stand mess, even if the cleaning means temporarily touching the very mess it finds objectionable. This is a small, precise piece of character writing. Minccino is anxious about cleanliness in a way that is at once endearing and mildly counterproductive, compelled to address disorder even at cost to itself. It is the kind of a specific, recognizable personality trait, the neurotic neat freak, who cannot leave a mess alone even while complaining about having to touch it. That makes Pokemon feel not just designed, but observed. Fact number 143. The Pokemon Tropius, a large dinosaur-like Pokemon with banana bunches hanging from its chin, introduced in Generation 3, is said to have grown the bananas because it ate so many of them in its youth. This is presented as a charming factoid in the Pokédex. But if taken literally, it describes a Pokemon that evolved a morphological feature, fruit growing from its body, as a direct result of a dietary habit. Tropius is a walking argument in the Pokemon world's biology for Lamarckian inheritance, the idea that acquired characteristics can be passed to offspring. The Pokemon games do not have a consistent or rigorous evolutionary biology, but they do occasionally stumble into interesting territory. Fact number 144. The Battle Tower, or its equivalent in each generation, is the feature of the Pokemon games most closely associated with the Satoshi Tajiri's personal design sensibility. The Battle Tower is an endless series of increasingly difficult battles with no story context, no exploration, no NPCs to talk to. It is pure challenge, the distilled essence of the game's battle system, endlessly remixed. In interviews, Tajiri has connected his love of this kind of iterative challenge to his childhood insect collecting. The repetitive, patient effort of going back to the same place, looking under the same rocks, trying the same techniques, in hopes of finding something new or achieving something more difficult. The Battle Tower is a digital meadow. Every trainer you face is another stone to look under. Fact number 145. The experience of completing the Pokédex, of catching, trading, and evolving your way to the final number, has never been easy and has never been meant to be easy. The franchise's explicit tagline in its early years was "Gotta catch 'em all." 3 words that contain an unspoken acknowledgement that all is a very large number, that catching requires time and effort and sometimes help from others, and that the completion of the collection is a goal that will occupy you for a long while. That the tagline was eventually quietly retired as the number of Pokemon grew past 300, 400, 500, and eventually past 1,000, is perhaps an acknowledgement that all had become a category too large for casual aspiration. But the desire, the deep, pleasant, patient desire to have them all, to complete the list, to fill every box, has never faded. It lives in the part of the brain that is also responsible for organizing bookshelves, sorting collections, and the specific satisfaction of a completed set. Fact number 146. In Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, there is a character named Arven whose storyline involves cooking meals, a mechanic called sandwiches, that provide temporary buffs to the player's Pokemon. But Arven's relationship with cooking is not mechanical in the narrative. It is emotional. He learned to cook because he was alone, because his parent was never home, because feeding himself and eventually others was the act through which he processed a difficult childhood. The sandwich mechanic in Scarlet and Violet is a children's game feature. Arven's backstory is a quiet story about loneliness, and the way some people learn to nourish others because no one nourished them. The two things sit together in the same menus, the same screens, the same game. Fact number 147. The Pokemon Slowbro, as established earlier, is an evolved form of Slowpoke, a Slowpoke that a Shelder clamped onto its tail. But there is a related evolution called Slowking, in which the Shelder clamps onto Slowpoke's head instead. The difference in location produces the difference in outcome. Slowbro is physically powerful but mentally unchanged. Slowking is described as extraordinarily intelligent. The venom from the Shelder on its head, interacting with the chemistry of Slowpoke's brain, produces profound cognitive enhancement. Slowking speaks human language in the Pokemon movies. It contemplates existence. The same creature, the same parasite, a different location. One becomes powerful. One becomes wise. The question of which you would choose if you were a Slowpoke is perhaps more interesting than it first appears. Fact number 148. The Pokemon games have, across their history, contained a recurring character type. The small child who claims to be a bug catcher, challenging the player to battle with a team of low-level insects at the very beginning of the game. These bug catchers, always young, always optimistic, always offering laughably small amounts of prize money for their defeat, are the game's first opponents, the ones who orient you to battle, the ones against whom you win your first victories. They are easy. They are meant to be easy, but they are also clearly young and sincere in doing exactly what they love. Satoshi Tajiri, Doctor. Bug, the boy who collected insects in the rice paddies and streams of childhood Machida, was a bug catcher. He grew up, and the thing he loved became the most successful entertainment franchise in the history of the world. But there is a version of him, preserved in amber in the data of every game, standing at the beginning of Route 1 in shorts and a fishing hat, holding a Caterpie, ready to battle. He is still there. He is still there every time you start a new game. And he is still, in his way, catching everything he loves. Fact number 149. The number of Pokemon officially in existence as of the most recent games exceeds 1,000. The exact count changes with each new generation. The franchise that began with 151 has grown into something that would have been unimaginable to the team in that small Tokyo studio in the early 1990s. And yet each new Pokemon is, in some fundamental way, the same thing as the first, a creature with a name and a life, and a relationship to the person who finds it. Fact number 150. The last Pokemon in the original Pokédex is Mewtwo. Not Mew, which came after, a secret appended to the list, but Mewtwo, the creature created by scientists from Mew's DNA, designed to be perfect, the ultimate weapon, the greatest power. Mewtwo escaped. Mewtwo lives alone in a cave, having destroyed the laboratory that created it, asking questions it cannot answer about the meaning of its own existence. It is the last creature in the list. It is the thing that humanity made and cannot contain. It is every instrument of power that exceeded its creator's intentions. In the first movie, Mewtwo says, "I see now that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It is what you do with the gift of life that determines who you are." This is a line of dialogue in a children's film. It is also, quietly, one of the most philosophically useful sentences ever spoken in a theater. Fact number 151. We have now reached the 151st fact, the number of Pokemon in the original Pokédex. The number that Tajiri chose, the number that felt complete. This is the Mew number. This is the one they weren't sure was real, the one that took asking around and trading rumors, and eventually attending a Nintendo event in a gymnasium in a strip mall in a city you drove 3 hours to reach. The 151st fact is simply this. The people who made Pokemon loved it. They loved it before it was successful, before it was iconic, before it was the most commercially successful media franchise in human history. They loved it when it was a photocopied magazine about arcade games and a programmer hiding a pink cat in a Game Boy cartridge. They loved it the way Satoshi Tajiri loved the insects in the rice paddies, with the specific, wordless, early morning quality of loving something that doesn't know it's being loved, that exists simply and completely in the world, that doesn't need to be useful or profitable or marketable to be worth caring about. You can feel that love in the game. You can feel it in the Pokemon Center music. You can feel it in the silence at the top of Mount Silver and in the small girl on the route who gives you a Bulbasaur because your Pikachu looks happy. You can feel it in the ruins of Alph and in the way the Lavender Town theme sounds when you're alone at night and the Game Boy screen is the only light in the room. They gave you something they loved. You loved it back. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. Fact number 152. The move Rest, which causes a Pokemon to fall into a deep sleep for 2 turns, fully restoring its HP and curing all status conditions, has been in every mainline game in the franchise. A Pokemon that uses Rest lays itself down. For 2 turns, it is completely vulnerable, asleep, unable to act, trusting that it will wake up healed. It is a mechanically risky move, the kind of strategy that requires faith in what comes after. Sleep well. You will wake up healed. That is the promise. Fact number 153, Ardana. Ash Ketchum's original stated goal in the very first episode of the anime was to become a Pokemon Master, a title never precisely defined in the series, a destination never fully arrived at, a goal that existed as a direction rather than a destination. He achieved it. Not in the way a map achievement is achieved, not with a certificate or a crown, but in the way a person becomes what they always were going to become, gradually across hundreds of journeys, through losses that taught him more than his victories did, through friendships that lasted and one that followed him everywhere. He is a Pokemon Master. He was always going to be. Fact number 154. Pikachu's cry has never changed. From the original Game Boy games to the most recent releases, the distinctive electric chirp of a Pikachu encountering an opponent, entering a Pokemon Center, winning a battle, greeting its trainer. It is the same sound. One sound carrying 30 years. Fact number 155 through 165, the last 11 facts, are offered not as trivia but as images. Small pictures each one. Something to carry into sleep. Fact 155. In the Pokemon world, the sky over Ecruteak City in Johto is sometimes described as holding the memory of Ho-Oh's passage, a rainbow that doesn't quite fade. Fact 156. Somewhere in the data of every game is a Pokemon at level 1, unhatched from its egg, waiting. Fact 157. In the Distortion world, gravity goes in every direction, and Giratina floats in a space that has no bottom and no ceiling. Fact 158. The Pokemon Absol appears before disasters, not to cause them, but to warn. It has been hunted for centuries for this. It keeps appearing anyway. Fact 159. Alakazam has an IQ exceeding 5,000 and can recall every experience it has ever had with perfect clarity. It never forgets anything. What that must be like is left to the imagination. Fact 160. The Pokemon world has no disease, no war, no hunger that the games address directly. It is not a perfect world. Team Rocket and Team Galactic and the others make that clear. But it is a world in which a 10-year-old with an open mind can walk out their front door and find something extraordinary by lunchtime. Fact 161. The berry system, introduced in Generation 2, means that somewhere in the Pokemon world, trees are growing fruit with effects that heal status conditions, boost statistics, and sustain long journeys. The world provides, if you know where to look. Fact 162. Jirachi, the Wish Pokemon, sleeps for 1,000 years and wakes for 7 days, long enough to grant one wish before returning to sleep. What would you wish for if you had 7 days and one wish? Fact 163. There is a Pokemon called Comfey that collects flowers and uses them to comfort the sick and injured. It lives on islands and tends to those who are hurting, wrapping them in petals that smell like good days. Fact 164. The Pokemon world has a moon. On clear nights, Clefairy dance in the moonlight on Mount Moon. They have always done this. They will always do this. Long after the players have put down their Game Boys and their Switches, somewhere in the quiet data of a digital world, Clefairy are dancing in the moonlight on a mountain. And fact 165. Somewhere a child is starting their very first Pokemon game. The screen is loading. The professor is clearing his throat. 3 Pokeballs are sitting on the table, and inside each one is something small and alive and looking forward to meeting them. The journey begins, as it always does, at the beginning. Sleep well.